We've barely talked about the black keys on the piano keyboard, so let's do that right now. The first thing I'd like to do is let's take a look at one of the black keys. Let's take a look at the black key that sits between C, which is a white key, and D, which is also a white key. So here's C, here's D, and now here's the black key that is right between C and D. Notice there's a musical reason that that black key sits right in between C and D. It's because that black key is a little bit higher than C, and it's a little bit lower than D. In fact, it's the smallest distance that we can travel from one note to the next, at least if we're on the piano keyboard. If we're on other instruments, there are actually gradations in between that we can hit, but we're not going to worry about that for right now. On the piano keyboard, the distance between C and the black note right above C and D and the black note right above D, or right below D, is the smallest distance we can travel. That smallest distance that we can travel is known as a half step. So from C to the black note above C is a half step. From the black note above C to D is also a half step. From D to the black note above D is a half step. From the black note above D to E is also a half step. Now we go from E to F, and notice there's no black key in between E and F. That's because the distance between E and F is a half step. So there's no room, musically at least, for a black key to go in between. There's no smaller distance that we can travel on the piano keyboard. As we continue up, the black note above the F, from F to the black note above the F, that's a half step. From that note up to G is a half step. From the G to the black note above G is a half step. From the black note above G to A is a half step. To the black note above that is a half step. From that black note to the B is a half step. And then notice we have another pair of white notes that are right next to one another, the B going up to the C. And it turns out that the B going up to the C is a half step as well. So if we go from the C up to the C one octave above, we will go through how many half steps? Well, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. There are 12 half steps that take us from C to the C an octave above. And if we play those half steps all together, sometimes we call this the chromatic scale. The chromatic scale. Which is all 12 notes, white and black keys from C to C. Or we could pick any note in the octave. We can go from G to G, or B to B, as long as we go through all 12 half steps. There's another distance that we can measure, though, as well, and that is the distance of 2 half steps in a row, and that is known as a whole step. A whole step is simply 2 half steps. So for instance, to go from C to D, we are traveling 2 half steps because we go C to the black key above C, then the black key above C to D. That is 1 whole step. which we sometimes abbreviate with a W. To go from D to E, since we go from D, 1 half step up, then another half step, it is 2 half steps to go from D to E, so that is another whole step. Notice, though, from E to F is just a half step, which we sometimes abbreviate with an H. To go from F to G is a whole step, because we go F to the black note above F, black note above F to G, and so forth. This works too if we start on a black key. For instance, suppose we start on this black key right here, the black key right above G. I can go a whole step up from this. If I go a whole step up from this, I have to go 2 half steps. So 1 half step brings me to A. The second half step brings me to the black key above A. So from the black key above G to the black key above A is also 1 whole step. Notice, by the way, in the white notes of the keyboard, most of the white notes of the keyboard are, or the distance between most adjacent white notes of the keyboard is 1 whole step. So for instance, as we just figured out, C to D is 1 whole step. D to E is 1 whole step. But E to F is a half step. F to G is back to a whole step. G to A is another whole step. A to B is another whole step. And then B to C is a half step. So most of the distances between white keys on the piano keyboard is a whole step, but there are some exceptions. Specifically, and this is going to become important later on in the semester, that half step between E and F, and that half step between B and C. Lock that little fact away, because that's going to become important in not too long. So in the next video, we will talk about what we actually call, or how we actually refer to and name these black keys on the piano keyboard.